Hello, this is Niswander, and you are watching the Nowman Show, podcast style, this time, and very first attempt at doing this, so it should be a very great conversation tonight. I have in the studio with me a gentleman who is from the working class, but also representing an organization called Socialist Alternative. And Chris Carroll, thank you for being on the Nowman Show.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, this is going to be a great conversation. There's a lot to get into, so let's get right into it.
Bet.
And we'll have a brief introduction here of Chris, a little bit about him as part of the working class, which we all are. Unless you're in the 1%, then you're an appropriator. That's another show. But I wanted to give you the focus of where we're headed with this. I'm going to start this conversation with where we are headed down the road. What's going to be happening after all this election debacle is going on in 2021 and beyond? Because we think a movement needs to grow, a party, creating a third political party, maybe fourth, but starting with third, and other ideas that we still are going to be talking about as we go through this conversation. But that's where we are headed. The movement going forward, creating a new political party, etc. So let's get right into this right now. And of course, we'll be talking about Bernie Sanders, his platform, and any questions that you might have going forward. The Nowman Show 2017 at gmail.com. Send me an email, and we'll get into those questions in future episodes. So, Chris, first of all, let's start with your background and where you are and your involvement with Socialist Alternative.
Sure. So I'm one of the lucky ones in the working class. I just have two jobs instead of 3 and 4. I'm a substitute teacher and a bartender, and then I'm an organizer for Socialist Alternative here in Los Angeles for the Los Angeles branch.
Fantastic. How long have you been doing that with the Socialist Alternative?
So I've been with SA for about 3.5 years.
Wow.
Years, yeah. And it's been... it's kind of been that political home I was looking for a number of years. It's taken me from, we're a national party and an international party, so it's taken me from campaigns from coast to coast, as well as to our world school in Barcelona 2 years ago.
Fantastic.
And it's an excellent organization. It's an organization that's small and growing, but knows how to punch above its weight, so to speak.
Well, it came to some attention with the election in 2013 of a woman of color running for city council in Seattle, whose name is Kshana Sawant. Can you tell us a little bit about that story and what's evolved over time since then?
Absolutely. So during the course of Occupy, different SA members were involved in the Occupy movement. What we saw there was an electoral opening, kind of a friendly kind of demand we put on the Occupy movement was that there should be hundreds of Occupy candidates that run in that next set of elections. That wasn't taken up, and so so I say there were a lot of elements of Occupy that were highly allergic to the electoral field.
That's very true,
and that's understandable. Many working class people are suspicious of the electoral field because it has not delivered for the working class, right? So
that's right.
But we saw an opportunity, and we encouraged Kshana Sawant. The organization encouraged Kshana Sawant to run for city council in Seattle in 2013, and we won. And we ran on a kind of unabashed working class program, and without hiding the fact that Kshana was a socialist, a Marxist, and a member of Socialist Alternative. And we ran very strongly on kind of the 15 Now. We built the 15 Now movement, and eventually, and we were successful in passing the first $15 wage legislation in a major city in the U.S.
That's fantastic because, she also got reelected in 2015 and then also in 2019, right?
Correct.
And she ran against candidates that had billionaire donors, such as Jeff Bezos, as everybody's should be aware of, the president of Amazon. That's was worth anyway, $150 billion before his divorce. And then also the former CEO of Starbucks, George Shultz, too. And each time they invested money in candidates to challenge her, they lost. So
That's right. That's right.
That's phenomenal.
It was an incredible campaign. Again, it starts with an incredible candidate, and then with the backing of our organization, but also with 6 years of fighting for the working class. The working class of Seattle showed up for Kshama, and it really did kind of have it was kind of the precursor to what we're seeing now with the Sanders campaign taking on not only the full brunt of the Democratic Party establishment, but really the ruling class at large. There was 3 different PACs that were organized in that Seattle City Council election. They ran a quote Amazon candidate that was kind of in their back pocket in each of the districts that were up for election.
Wow.
Yes, but most of their fire was concentrated at Kshana Sawant.
Of course, right.
About $4 million between these PACs, and most of that was concentrated at defeating Kshama. And it shows what a grassroots campaign with a strong working class socialist platform and a strong fighting class struggle strategy can do. It can win. We can beat the billionaires.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And yes, that's really a phenomenal story. I mean, I think that it's one that we should continue to be talking about, as we go forward in conversations with our peers and new peers and all of that ongoing indefinitely.
Absolutely.
And then the $15 an hour minimum wage idea, if you follow the Bernie Sanders campaign, and that has become a big part of his platform. It did actually in 2015, and it continues in the election of 2020 that's going on right now. The primary season is in full swing now at the time we're recording this. So it's very powerful. And it needs to be acknowledged. Give credit where the credit is due, and know that there is power and there is success in socialistic ideas. It's not all about authoritarianism and failure. So that being said, and here we are in election season again as we go through here in this dysfunctional process every 4 years for president. Of course, there's always these other elections in between, as we were just talking about as far as a local election in Seattle. But what we have been seeing and what we had saw in the 2015-2016 campaign was what many felt were not irregularities at the very least, but definitely some ways of actual rigging, which could be proven in the form of superdelegates, and also in the Podesta emails that got turned over to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. It clearly showed that there was some kind of agenda in play. I do want to mention that this Iowa caucus that just ended, right out of the gate in the primaries, it's now blatant. It's now out in the open. I think we'll probably see millions more people actually have some kind of an awareness that this is going on. And I've been telling people, psychologically prepare yourself for what's coming down the pike, and I think we're already seeing that rude awakening, if you will, and we're going to see more and more of it as time goes on. So, but for me, the most important thing to get into are the issues. So, and what are popular with most people, and we can start with healthcare. What's phenomenal about that issue is that polls that I have seen, even 65% of Republicans, something like that, are in favor of Medicare for all, single payer. I mean,
absolutely,
it's mind-boggling to see how we just can't get that. We're told that we can't afford it. Mm-hmm. And if we were to say anything like, well, how come we don't ask that question about the war budgets?
Right. Right. Yeah. Anytime someone from the political class tells you that they can't afford something that the working class needs, they're lying through their teeth. Right. It's yeah. I mean, I think especially with the Medicare for All issue, I mean, it's going to take a massive effort to win it. Right. I mean, and I think that's Sanders himself recognizes that it's going to take a movement. He needs to build a movement to win his platform, right? And I think what the people around Sanders who are energized, and that started in 2015, 2016, and that's why SA got involved in supported Sanders the first time around, and have gotten even more involved this time around in 2020, is that he's done just that. He's energized wide layers of the working class, and we want to be around that energy. We want to be around that heat. There's even in 2016, if he would have just not run again, just the fact that he introduced political revolution against the billionaire class and started and popularized democratic socialism, if that would have been his political legacy, that would have been a pretty great legacy, right?
Well, it's kind of like Occupy Wall Street, people, after that happened, they were saying it didn't do anything, it didn't accomplish anything, and I'm like, excuse me, the narrative of the 1% getting the majority of the income and the wealth, and the 99% basically not being included in that process, that's still part of what's on people's minds when they have conversations about the economy. That came directly out of Occupy Wall Street, and largely because of people like David DeGraw, who did the economic research and wrote these blogs and put it in a book here, and that's where he came to the conclusion. Actually, it was more like 0.01%, but, it's like math, you round it off. It sounds better when you say 1%. But that started with Occupy. Yes. So to say that it didn't accomplish anything, just completely wrong. Mm-hmm. So, never think too small, right, about how an idea can affect things.
Well, and that's a great point, Dan. I mean, you're a musician.
Yeah,
so you're gonna follow me on this one. I'm gonna go way back. Do you remember the Bangles?
Oh yeah, the Bangles. Yeah.
So I was listening to
Suzanne, and
that's right.
Yeah.
I was listening to the radio the other day, and a Bangles song came out. It's called "Under a Cloud," and there's a great lyric in the song. It says, "Been down so long, I'm afraid of heights." And really, if you put that in the context of American politics, and especially in the working class, I mean, that's the political consciousness of the working class, right? It has been beaten down through 40 years of neoliberalism.
That's right.
That the expectations about what we can win when we fight are so low. And that's really what Sanders has reignited. It's reignited and lifted expectations of wide layers of the working class. They're saying, why don't we have Medicare for all, and why can't we win it? Why don't we have free college, and why can't we win it?
Why don't we have at least a jobs program, or the Green New Deal to include that in, changing our energy systems away from fossil fuels completely to where it's renewable and it's solar, it's wind, and just 100% transition. Why can't we have an economic bill of rights that is a part of that process, and also addresses the issues of, the gig jobs, the temporary jobs, the low wage jobs, the little or no benefit jobs, which were starting with the Obama era, were 94% of the jobs that were created at that time, even though he, as Trump, brag about all these jobs, but 94% or something like that of those jobs are those kinds of jobs that nobody wants. But we have to take them, or two or three of them, to pay our bills. So that's a crisis in itself. And that Bernie Sanders, pretty much alone in 2015, 2016 brought that to the national consciousness.
And you're seeing the same phenomenon around the globe, right? There is massive resentment and anger around 40 years of neoliberalism, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Even in the welfare states of Europe, right?
That's right.
Where they had mass working class parties that fought for a really strong set of demands that were implemented under kind of those social democracies, right?
That's right.
You're seeing those, they've been whittled away for 40 years under this neoliberal assault. But then coming back to the U.S., we never had that mass working class party in the U.S. We had periods when the union movement, labor movement was very strong.
That's right.
When the social movements were very strong. We won some reforms. But again, they've been whittled away and whittled away. And that's an important lesson in the context of the Sanders campaign and the whole movement around Bernie, right? That we do need to continue to build that movement, but that movement needs to kind of we need to start thinking a step or two ahead, right? Because you mentioned Iowa, the Democratic Party establishment and all of the institutions available to the ruling class are arrayed against Sanders, right? And it's going to get nastier, and it's going to continue, right? And so we have to ask ourselves a set of questions. Can Bernie survive this nomination process? If he does, can he win the general with his own party still undermining him? And again, all those institutions of the ruling class and the Republican Party and Trump coming at him, right? Can he win that? If he does, can he pass his program if he becomes president? Again, with all those forces continue to be arrayed against him. And that's where this idea of building a movement really comes into play. And I think the question that comes in after that is, what's the best way to galvanize and lead a movement? And to Socialist Alternative, the clear answer is establishing a new working class party that's independent ideologically and financially from the ruling class.
Yeah, and I think that there's already, because of the Sanders campaign too, it's bringing, I guess you could say it's starting to bring a coalition of groups together, that are, endorsing him, and they're working with the campaign and with grassroots, also organizing for promoting Bernie, and so it's you got the PSL, you got the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America. They are endorsing Bernie Sanders. SA is endorsing Bernie Sanders. There are a lot of Green Party people out there that are supporting Sanders. And there's also progressive clubs within the Democratic Party that obviously are, supporting Sanders. Some who were delegates at the Philadelphia Convention, and they saw what went on behind the scenes there. Some of them have been on my show.
Think about this next convention coming up. I mean, it's looking very likely that Sanders could have a plurality of delegates, but not a majority needed to win on the first round. And then what comes into play on the second round are the superdelegates. That no one should have any illusions as to what's going to happen in that second round, right? So there's a strong, an increasing likelihood that the convention in Milwaukee will be explosive.
Oh, yes.
Explosive. And those that haven't drawn those conclusions about the true nature of the Democratic Party, they will draw those conclusions strongly if Sanders is undermined again in an explosive, corrupt convention. And that's why we have to be ready to pivot from that right away and say we have to already have conferences in place where these different elements, the left of the labor movement, the social movements, the different socialist parties, we have to be ready and have these conferences ready to go so we can get together and start talking about how we're going to get this new party off the ground.
Absolutely. I mean, there's already certain key people, even associated with the Democratic Party, if not in the Democratic Party, have already alluded to this kind of idea. For instance, at the Left Forum last year, which takes place in New York City every year. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
The Left Forum. Jane Sanders was one of the speakers. What they call it, keynote speakers. Right. And there's a clip out there where she talks about if the Democratic Party continues as it has been, there will be, she said this, there will be a third party.
Wow.
She didn't say maybe. And then recently you pointed something out.
I hope she's talking to Bernie about that.
Well, I'm sure she is. I mean,
I'm being facetious, but it's no guarantee which way Sanders is going to go if he's undermined again.
That's right.
You hope he's.
Well, this is his. It'll get to the point where you challenge his legacy. We don't know what will happen because this is his legacy, right. And it's also what the 99% want.
if Sanders and AOC stepped away and called for the founding of a new party and had a website set up, that website would crash in the first couple of hours. People would want to be a part of that.
I agree. I agree because it would just be overwhelmed with
Absolutely.
Well, I mean that's happened. With Occupy, David DeGraw was bombarded with either emails or texts so fast, that it was overwhelming, And but anyway, the AOC made a comment, and you pointed that out to me, and you asked me when she made a certain comment recently, do you think she's alluding to the idea of a third party when she said was it in Europe? If this were in Europe, I wouldn't be in the same party as Joe Biden. So I think what she's doing is she's putting a feeler out there to see how people respond to that, because we have to have this discussion. We have to talk about as you said, we have to be able to pivot into whatever it is that we need to do, and the issues still are at the forefront. You still have Medicare for all. You still have education. You still have transitioning energy systems and creating good paying jobs for people, and transitioning away from fossil fuels, as well as the infrastructure that needs to be money needs to be available for the infrastructure, just like it was in the 1930s with the Public Works Program, the WP. So these are all things that need to still be discussed, and in the context of a political party. So you got to get all these different groups together. So we really need to start having this discussion and basically talking about everything in public forums like this, except for the strategies we're going to use. Those will happen privately. But we need to talk about, we definitely need to get this out in the open and get people to actually start thinking about this seriously right now. And I mean, we should have the warning sign from the Iowa caucus right there that should tell us that we need to start this conversation. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. And just going back to AOC, I mean, it was more than just that statement about AOC and Biden not being in the same party anywhere else in the world. She has also refused to pay dues to the DNC. She set up a PAC. Right. She set up a PAC that's kind of in contrast to the DCCC. It's a PAC that is raising money to support working class candidates. I mean, these are bold steps. They're provocative steps. Now, is that because AOC is still laboring under the illusion that the Democratic Party can be reformed, or is that AOC preparing the ground towards a pivot, towards a new party? We don't know. We're not inside AOC's head. But that's, and again, consciousness isn't static, right? She's going to be affected by the next 7 months the same way we are during the how many? We got 9 months to the general election, right? A lot of stuff is going to happen, and a lot of people might move one direction or another as things play out.
Brace yourself for the psychological changes that are going to be happening. That you cannot keep looking at the world you live in the way you have been. Things are changing, and they're changing sometimes on a daily basis. And I'm not talking about Twitter. You know what I'm saying? And the interesting thing about all of this is that there's so much work to do, that there's something for everyone to participate in. A person might, say, well, I don't have time, or blah, blah, blah. You will make time. I mean, and I know working housewives with children, busy lives, and they are out there involved already doing things. So you can get off your couch and spend some of your time, being involved in some capacity, doing something.
Have you heard the stories, Dan, about the people that traveled to Iowa to donate their time and to get involved in Sanders' campaign? I mean, it was coast to coast. These are working class people and families throwing gas in their tank and driving God knows how many miles to the great state of Iowa, right? To work in the frigid temps of a Midwestern winter, right?
I know. I'm looking forward to talking to some people from LA that are there now and coming back. There's people also going to New Hampshire. You know what I mean? It's because it's full speed ahead. I mean, that's why there's a lot of eyes and ears taking a look at things now that maybe There were in 2015, 2016, but nobody believed us because it was called conspiracy. Right now, all hands are on deck, and it's going to become more and more difficult for this stuff to be dismissed now after what just happened. But again, focusing on the party, where do you see? And you mentioned pivoting immediately, regardless of what the outcome is in the election in November 2020. Where do you see what do you see the first steps being? Do you see keeping the satellite offices for Bernie, keeping those open and doing similar kinds of things, except not working on an election anymore? What do you think?
I mean, that's an excellent question. I mean, right now, the idea of a new party is still somewhat in the abstract. It's going to kind of become more and more concrete in people's minds as this election season plays out, the different twists and turns and the different scenarios that could play out. As they do, we'll get closer to kind of starting to concretize this idea. But for the sake of this discussion, I mean, to begin with, to set a date, a time, and a location for a conference, the purpose of which is to get these different components, these different organizations, and these different people and parties in the room to say, if we want to win, whether Sanders wins or loses, if we still want to fight for and win his platform, reforms that we desperately need, that the working class desperately needs, the best way to do that is to form a mass working class party. That's when we can fight with a full might as a class, right? And you see moments in history when we've won big reforms. We alluded to it earlier, right? And I think part of the kind of the illusion about wanting to transform the Democratic Party is based in I do believe a misunderstanding and a misreading of history and of the New Deal. The New Deal wasn't a bunch of Democrats sitting around puffing on cigars going, hey, what kind of giveaways can we give to the working class? It's been a rough go for them. Let's give them Social Security. Let's give them a works program. Let's build a dam or two.
It was a coalition. I've gone over this. Richard Wolff has said on the show. I've said on the show, it was a coalition of socialists, communists, and the unions.
Absolutely. We
have to, unfortunately, wrap this up.
You bet.
But let's continue this conversation. Maybe the next time we can fill these seats. What do you think about that?
That sounds great.
We'll create a coalition and have this conversation continued.
Can I do one shameless plug?
Absolutely.
So Socialist Alternative will be sponsoring a public meeting on February 29th at the UTLA building downtown on Wilshire.
Oh, fantastic.
On the 8th floor, room 826. And we're going to be talking about just what we've been talking about. Where do we go in California and beyond? How do we build a movement for Bernie? How do we build a movement to win Sanders' platform? How do we build, or at least start laying the groundwork for building this mass workers' party?
Fantastic. Chris, thank you so much for being on the Nowman Show.
Dan, it was a pleasure.
Absolutely. You've been watching the Nowman Show first podcast version with Chris Carroll from Socialist Alternative. My name is Niswander. Always stay present in the moment, always.
Let's all try to put the pieces back together.